peace and freedom gives also a right for all peoples of the world to live freely and peacefully. We shall do our peace not only in our part of the world, but also contribute in safeguarding world peace and security.
The burning unrest in the Middle East is as hot as the desert sands and as old as recorded history. 3,000 years ago, the twin kingdoms of Israel and Judah flourished in the ancient land of Zion. Later, Arab warriors came and conquered, ruling and roaming the desert for hundreds of years. To Jews and Muslims, the city of Jerusalem became a symbol of age-old conflict and bitter dispute. The militant Arabs claimed a territorial right to Jerusalem and Palestine that was 1,000 years old. But the determined leaders of Zionism pleaded a right that was even older, dating to the time of King Solomon and the sacred Wailing Wall, a relic of Solomon's temple that still stands. In 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the George Washington of Israel, led his people and his country to independence. The new nation was carved out of territory that the Arab powers in the Middle East claimed as their own. Independence had been won. Now freedom must be secured. The so-called Arab League vowed the total defeat and utter annihilation of the infant nation. King Farouk of Egypt pledged his support, and Abdullah of Jordan directed his British-trained and equipped army to take up battle positions on the Israeli border. The Jordanian forces were joined by military regiments from Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia. Israel stood alone, one nation against six. The odds were great, but the young country's love of freedom was greater. Her people, who wanted only peace, took up the weapons of war. Israel came under siege, held fast, and struck back. An astonished world saw the Arab invaders hurled back on all fronts. During the bitter fighting, Israel lost none of her original territory and actually increased her area by 20%. Within a month, the Arab troops were in full retreat, and the United Nations was able to arrange a truce. In 1954, Gamal Abdel Nasser seized power in Egypt and proclaimed himself the new leader of the Muslim crusade to drive Israel into the sea. First, he negotiated the withdrawal of British troops from the Suez Canal zone. Not long after, the first Soviet ship since World War I passed through the canal. Russia had a vital interest in the strategic waterway. The Egyptian leader refused, however, to let Israeli vessels use the canal. Once again, the Muslim nations of the Middle East encircling Israel, outnumbering her in population, 60 million to 3 million, plotted new and provocative actions. Nasser negotiated a military alliance of Arab nations to include King Hussein of Jordan and King Saud of Saudi Arabia. Syria also joined in the treaty as the Arab bloc witnessed its solidarity to the world. In November 1956, Israel invaded Egypt to wipe out border bases that, she said, had been used to attack Israeli villages. Within a week, France and England intervened on the side of Israel. French paratroops dropped on the canal zone, while British invasion units waited ashore below. Nasser suffered his worst defeat since coming to power. His army was no match for the Anglo-French-Israeli forces. Thousands of Egyptians surrendered. The victorious soldiers of Israel had been directed by General Moshe Dayan, a daring and brilliant field leader. The Israeli army was in complete command, the victory secure, when the United Nations acted, and with American backing, Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld persuaded the British, French, and Israeli forces to lay down their arms and withdraw. Traveling to Cairo, the Secretary General negotiated an agreement with Nasser that would enable a UN peacekeeping force to take up border positions on Egyptian soil. The intervention of the United Nations brought to an end the second grave crisis in 8 years in the Middle East. But again, Israel had extended her borders. Again, her conquests had displaced tens of thousands of Arabs from territory claimed as their own. And again, no real basis had been found for a lasting peace. Hailing the UN intervention, Nasser claimed a great Egyptian victory. And throughout the Arab world, he was compared to Saladin, hero of the Crusades. As the years pass, the Egyptian leader begins to speak of still another holy war against Israel. Militarism again is on the march, and even the very young are caught up in Nasser's crusade. Purchased with Egyptian cotton, Russian equipment makes up the backbone of his armed might. Then in 1967, the Egyptian leader turns to the Gulf of Aqaba to translate threats against Israel into provocative actions. In a dramatic announcement made in Cairo, Nasser tells the world that the Strait of Tiran, controlling access to and from the Gulf of Aqaba, is being closed to Israeli shipping. The action cuts off Israel's water link with the Red Sea. While the United Nations struggles to preserve the peace, the Egyptian leader takes still another step that will involve directly the UN. Secretary General U Thant is informed that Egypt will no longer allow the UN peacekeeping force to remain on her soil. Israeli aircraft go on alert as Egyptian troops move into the Sinai Peninsula. And when Israeli border towns are shelled, the pilots are ordered to attack. The Israeli aircraft, taking off from widely scattered bases, fly carefully coordinated patterns, striking simultaneously at targets in Egypt, Syria, Jordan. The surprise attack gives Israel complete control of the air. Hundreds of Egyptian planes are destroyed, and Syria and Jordan suffer similar crippling losses. The Israeli military machine, toughened by 2 earlier wars, unleashes a lightning strike that will overshadow even the spectacular victory of 1956. And this time, Israel will do it without the British and French. Newspaper headlines record the start of the war and the smashing success of the Israeli forces. The swirling sands of the Sinai Desert become a dusty road to victory as armored units rout the enemy and race ahead. The story is the same on all fronts. The vaunted Jordanian army is in full retreat. The soldiers of Syria are fleeing for their lives. In 72 hours, the Israeli assault sweeps to the banks of the Suez Canal. While one spearhead is pushed westward to Suez, another strike is directed southward to the Strait of Tiran. Here, too, the Israeli juggernaut grinds relentlessly toward its goal. Casualties are light on both sides, as the Egyptian troops show neither the desire nor the ability to engage the Israeli soldiers. And with the same ease that they reached the shores of Suez, the victorious armies achieve another objective, the Sharm el-Sheikh, commanding the Strait of Tiran. General Moshe Dayan has returned to win new military acclaim as the architect of victory in the Lightning War of 1967. In 6 incredible days, the Arab nations are totally, utterly defeated. Captured Russian equipment stands as mute testimony to the military disaster. And so when a UN ceasefire is negotiated, Russia seeks to win diplomatically what her allies had lost in the war. Premier Alexei Kosygin comes to New York to attend a special session of the United Nations General Assembly, called to discuss and debate the newest crisis in the Middle East. The Soviet premier's conduct in the assembly is more restrained, more temperate than the shoe-pounding exhibition put on by Nikita Khrushchev in 1960. But Kosygin's words are just as harsh, just as intemperate. He demands UN condemnation of Israeli aggression, immediate and unconditional withdrawal of Israeli forces, and reparations to Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The Russian leader's words fall on deaf ears. The assembly adjourns without any concrete action to resolve the smoldering dispute. But for the third time in 20 years, UN peacekeeping detachments take up their watch on the troubled borders of Israel. Large areas remain in dispute. Israel has annexed the old city of Jerusalem from Jordan, despite protests from the United States, many free world nations, and of course the Arab countries and Russia. The war has created new refugee camps to add to the settlements that have sprung up in the desert since Israel first gained independence in 1948. More than 1 million Arabs have been displaced in the 2 decades of turmoil. Homeless and helpless, they struggle to survive while the search for peace, lasting peace, goes on. Victorious Israel insists that any settlement of territorial problems must come in direct negotiations with Arab leaders. But her reluctance to return all conquered areas unites the Arab world in solid opposition and creates apprehension among those countries sympathetic to Israel and her cause. Once again, war seems to have solved and settled nothing. And the cradle of civilization continues to be